أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. وأوفوا بعهد الله إذا عاهدتم ولا تنقضوا الأيمان بعد توكيدها وقد جعلتم الله عليكم كفيلا إن الله يعلم ما تفعلون. ولا تكونوا كالتي نقضت غزلها من بعد قوة أنكاثا تتخذون أيمانكم دخلا بينكم أن تكون أمة هي أربى من أمة إنما يبلوكم الله به وليبينن لكم يوم القيامة ما كنتم فيه تختلفون. ولو شاء الله لجعلكم أمة واحدة ولكن يضل من يشاء ويهدي من يشاء ولتسألن عما كنتم تعملون. ولا تتخذوا أيمانكم دخلا بينكم فتزل قدم بعد ثبوتها وتذوقوا السوء بما صددتم عن سبيل الله ولكم عذاب عظيم. صدق الله العظيم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Shukran to Qari Tanzilur Rahman for that beautiful and melodious recitation of verses of the Quran. I want to bid a warm welcome to all of you that have joined this webinar this afternoon. And I want to just give some acknowledgement to all our participants. We have participants from different parts of South Africa, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town, KwaZulu-Natal. We have participants from different parts of Africa, Botswana, Malawi, Nigeria, Uganda, etc. And we also have our international participants, or rather from out of Africa, Indonesia, Malaysia. Welcome to all of you on this beautiful sunny afternoon in South Africa. It is in KZN, and I'm sure it is in other parts of South Africa as well. Now, this session, I don't only want to welcome those of you who are here on the webinar, but this session is also being streamed on Awqaf's YouTube channel as well as Awqaf's Facebook page. So to all of you who have joined in through the Facebook page and through the YouTube channel, welcome as well. Now, this particular series of workshops have started last year, and this is another installment from Awqaf in their series of workshops on corporate governance for Islamic non-profit organizations. And today's session, this afternoon's session, is specifically dealing with strategic planning. Now, I remember a long time ago when I did a little bit of management courses, etc. There's something that stuck in my mind right from then was, if we fail to plan, then we plan to fail. And I'm sure that this whole idea of strategic planning is quite an intrinsic part for a healthy organization to develop and to exist. And there are many, many different ideas around this, and this is all that we're going to have an expert telling us on how we can actually go about crafting a particular strategic plan for our organization, but not just crafting it, because we must go the step beyond merely compiling and crafting a plan. We must also be able to implement it. And so that is going to be dealt with in the presentation this afternoon. And we have selected for you an expert on this particular issue, Mr. Afzul Soobedaar, who's going to be leading the discussion on this. Now, let me tell you a little bit about our guest speaker this afternoon, or our guest presenter. Firstly, who is he? He's a self-employed management consultant, and that in itself is telling us that he is engaged in the field of management, which makes him the expert on this issue. He's a seasoned executive manager and has talent for strategic thinking and strategic planning, without which obviously he wouldn't be able to deal with this seminar this afternoon. And his experiences are from a wide range of issues. In the field, it comes from having played a central role in the development of strategy from conceptualization through to implementation. So like I said to you, not just being able to conceptualize your plan, but also to take it that step further and to implement it. And then he also goes on to tell us about how he has gained experience around performance reporting. So what happens after you implement, sometimes what are the hitches you come across, and he has experience of monitoring in both the private and the public sector. So clearly coming with a huge amount of experience on this issue. He started his consulting business a while ago. He served on the executive committee of the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration. For those of you who are not too au fait with that particular organization, it's the first port of call for labor dispute resolutions in South Africa. And he served there in the capacity of National Senior Commissioner under the Collective Bargaining and Outreach Program. And he did that for over 9 years. Okay. So in terms of his qualification, he holds an MBA from the former University of Durban Westville, now the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Afzal, I didn't know that about you until I read that, and we must have crossed paths somewhere, because I myself is an alumni of UDW, and I always say that I stand by firmly that I'm an alumni of UDW, even though we have now merged and become UKZN. So I'm going to hand you over to Afzal, who's going to take us through his presentation. And once that's done, we will have a question and answer session. So you are invited to post your questions on the chat if you haven't already posted them on the question platform. And so I hand over to you, Afzal.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's really an honor to be able to address this august gathering on what I know about strategic planning. So let us get right into it. We're going to be talking about strategic planning for nonprofits. Now, I'd like to think about strategic planning as answering 5 questions. Why do we exist? Where are we now? Where would we like to be? How are we going to get there? And how will we know that we are on track? There's lots of definitions of strategic planning that you'll come across in textbooks, but at the end of the day, this is what they sound through at the heart of it. And during the course of this afternoon, inshallah, I will take you through each of these steps, and we would have answered all of these questions hopefully for your strategic plan through a structured process. So why is strategic planning important for nonprofits? I think the key thing is that it provides a roadmap to help a nonprofit accomplish its purpose. And that is huge. It does this by firstly establishing clarity and agreement on the nonprofit's purpose, which happens through the actual planning process, as you'll see. It also guides the allocation and utilization of resources. It guides and improves decision making, helps to anticipate and manage change and uncertainty, and generally enables the organization to function from an intentional and active place rather than a reactive place, and prepares the organization for the future. One thing we're going to be winding through in today's presentation is purpose. And to my mind, the most important thing for a nonprofit is to accomplish its purpose. So with that, let's have a poll. Does your organization have a strategic plan? You've got 4 options there. Yes, we do. No, we don't. Yes, but it needs to be updated. Yes, but we don't follow it. And finally, I don't know. Please vote, and then we'll talk about this poll a little later in the program. Now, in preparing for strategic planning, there's a lot that goes into it. And if you do not prepare properly for strategic planning, it's like having a meeting about this, coming to a meeting unprepared, and we all know what happens with that kind of scenario. So firstly, you've got to establish a strategic planning team. And 2 things are very important there. That it's got to be a diverse team and ideally representative of all stakeholders, your board, management, staff, donors, partners, volunteers, beneficiaries, and community members. I refer throughout the presentation to the people who are served by nonprofits as beneficiaries, just for convenience. The reason why you want a diverse team is simply because you want people in the room who can think strategically, who can think beyond their own agenda or their own area of responsibility in the nonprofit. Because at the end of the day, strategic planning becomes everybody's business, and everybody's got to contribute to it, which is why you want as many people in the room as you can get. Okay. Those people who you can't get into the room, we can get information from, as we'll talk about in a little bit. You then got to decide on a planning framework. There's a plethora of planning frameworks out there, but I find that the one that works most appropriately for nonprofits is called the balanced score. Excuse me, the balanced scorecard, and that's what we'll be using today. You then got to decide on a planning time horizon, and typically that horizon used to be 3 to 5 years. And a lot of things have changed since last year. You know, when we were visited by the coronavirus, it has changed the playing fields in such a way like we've never seen before. So when you look at a planning time horizon, 5 years is really out of the ballpark now. And planning time horizons are becoming shorter. All right, you can't have a strategic plan for 1 year, for example, because that's going to be too short. But somewhere between that will determine, you know, what is best for you, and that is normally determined as part of the process by the strategic objectives that that you are trying to achieve, and depending on how long they're going to take. And invariably, your planning time horizon, you might start off deciding, to plan for 3 years, and you might end up planning for longer, or start with a shorter period and end up planning for longer. Information is absolutely vital to this process. I cannot stress this enough. And we need objective information, we need relevant information, we need information that's up to date. We need information about the organization itself. Stuff like the financial history of the organization. You need information about programs that the organization has had. What has worked, what has not worked. Any surveys that the organization may have carried out, and anything that will actually help us to understand ourselves better as an organization. And that's just one part of it. You also need to get information about the operating environment, including competitor organizations, the economy, social trends, insights from others, and this can be your board members, your management staff, donors, volunteers, partners, beneficiaries, community members, and virtually anybody else you actually want to talk to, industry experts, people who are knowledgeable. You don't have to involve them in the process itself, but you could interview them to get their insights about your organization, and about the kind of future that your organization is trying to craft. You then decide on a planning format, and I think by default, for the foreseeable future, all planning is going to be done remotely. And alhamdulillah, we have the technology to do that. It makes no sense now to fly a whole lot of people to a particular place when we could be sitting here and talking and engaging. There's incredible software out there that enables people from around the world to collaborate remotely. And I don't think I would ever want to go back to face-to-face meetings, but that's a personal choice. Then you've got to set up a project plan to time box the process, because your strategic plan should not be taking 3 to 6 months to conduct, although sometimes it could take that long depending on the complexity. But if you time box the process, work with a project plan, and assign responsibility to somebody to drive the process, then we will be able to get cracking. All right, so these are some of the major points that you're going to take into consideration before you even get into this meeting called a strategic planning meeting. So this afternoon, we're going to go up this windy road. We'll start out by defining concepts of purpose, values, mission, and vision. I'll show you how you conduct an assessment of the situation, identify strategic priorities, define objectives, set measures and targets, select initiatives, and over the hill that's a little bit out of sight now is implementation and strategic risk management, which we also talk about. But before we go any further, I think there's a video that I'd like to share with you for context.
Let me pull out my soapbox for a minute here. Please stop calling yourself not-for-profit, right? That is a tax delineation, right? And no one wants to be defined by what you're not. First, that's number one. Number two, of course you're profitable. You just don't define profit in terms of dollars and cents. If you set up an organization to rescue kittens out of trees, you better be profitable, because it means you're rescuing more kittens out of trees than not. So just redefine how you define profit. Stop calling yourselves not-for-profit and start calling yourselves for-impact organizations. That's the first way to get your back on track. Because what it does is it puts your why front and center and not money. Money is just an object. It's fuel. Money is fuel. You need fuel to make the car go, but that's not why the car exists. You're a for-impact organization. The question is what impact are you trying to make in the world? And that's how you can help keep your why front and center, which is you're constantly reminding yourself of it. It's written on the walls. I think one of the big mistakes that a lot of for-impact organizations make is they actually don't know how to define their cause. We want to change the world. Well, I don't know what that looks like. Great vision is something that you can imagine in your mind's eye. And the great leaders in our world, whether they're business leaders, political leaders, or civil leaders, are able to articulate vision in terms that we can imagine ourselves in that world. I have a dream that one day little black children will hold hands on the playground with little white children. Like, you can see that in your mind's eye. Paint a picture for us and then set yourself on course towards that. I think the other thing is, for impact organizations need to stop competing against each other. It drives me nuts. Two organizations that are trying to help, find the cure for cancer, competing against each other. You've got to be nuts. One has strength, the other one has weaknesses. This one has strengths that the other one has weaknesses. Why not combine forces? You're more likely to find the cure for cancer if you actually work together as opposed to in competition with each other. But the whole idea is keep the why front and center in crystal clear terms that we can imagine, and call yourself a for impact organization. It'll go a long way.
That was Simon Sinek who introduced us the golden circle, saying, start with asking why, or start with the why. And today I'm going to introduce you to the golden pentagram. Is this a pentagram? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, no, possibly. Starting this journey of developing a strategic plan is you need to start to understand the organization and to define the organization. And we start with the why. We start with our purpose. Purpose states why an organization exists, what issues it seeks to solve. It is, that reason for existence. It's important that this is clearly defined and that it is understood throughout the organization to such an extent that every person knows how they contribute to the purpose of the organization, that they should know what they are there for. Okay? So that's the first question we ask ourselves, why? And if there's only one thing you take away from today's presentation, take this away, that if you do not understand why you exist, it's going to be a problem. And you need to take some time out to actually figure that out if you haven't already figured that out. As we move out towards the end of the circle from the center, the next thing we encounter is how. And this is about values. Values describe how the organization behaves, what guides conduct in how it operates in pursuing its purpose. Now, when it comes to Islamic nonprofits, that's probably the easiest question to answer, because we should all be guided by the teachings of Islam. There can't be any debate about that. But defining something is one thing, and living it is quite another. One of the questions that came in was, how do you instill an Islamic vision, of excellence in an organization, an Islamic value of excellence into an organization? I would basically say, how do you instill Islamic values into the organization? Do we portray these values when we deal with the people we deal with, and have different values to deal with the people who are inside the organization? I think we have a lot of examples of where that has happened. And behaving in a particular way means behaving that way in all our interactions with our staff, with the people we serve, with our donors, with our partners, with society at large. Your mission basically sets out what you do to accomplish your purpose. Okay? Mission answers the question, what? What do we do? For why we do it, for why we exist. And finally, we get to the vision. And vision describes where the organization intends to have impact. It's a visualization of what success looks like if your purpose is accomplished. And you can see how purpose is central to all of this. That without purpose, what would we be doing? And there's a lot of organizations, nonprofits and otherwise, who have misunderstood their purpose and have paid the price for that. Could give you some examples. Kodak, for example, the company that we now read about in history books, was once upon a time a mega player, and they didn't understand their purpose. They used to make film. For those who are younger than me, they used to make film that we'd put in cameras to take pictures. They understood their purpose as making film, when in fact their purpose was actually to help people preserve memories. When film went out of, when that industry was disrupted, Kodak basically found itself on its knees. And that's simply because it did not understand its purpose or did not define its purpose. Anyway, so these four things basically define the organization and set the stage for everything that's going to come going forward. All right, but okay. So we start by assessing the current situation. And we use a couple of tools here. The first tool we use is called a pestle analysis. Pestle is a acronym from what this looks at: the political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. And really, you're asking questions that are contained in each of these blocks, like, what are the regulatory issues, forms of legislation, whether enacted, pending, that could affect the organization. These are all external factors that we are looking at. What major trends in the economy exist? What are the major changes in taste, preferences, and behaviors? And something like this is very important. Organizations, profit, non-profit, and otherwise, sometimes gloss over these things when they do not have the ear to the ground. If you look at how COVID has changed the way we live in terms of our social behavior, in terms of how we've had to adapt to a situation. Technological, what significant developments on the technological front could impact the organization? And this could be positively or negatively. I mean, the situation with nonprofits, and some nonprofits use social media, for example, quite effectively. Others tend to shy away from it, and we should be looking at how we can leverage technology, to help us fulfill our purpose. What environmental concerns face the business, and what are the prevailing legal conditions, and how might they affect the organization? Like I said, all of this is about externalities, and these questions need deep reflection and objective answers, and enable us to get some idea of not some idea, but a good idea of what's going on out there. Your pest analysis, the input from here feeds into our next tool, which is the SWOT analysis. The SWOT analysis tool that everybody knows about. It talks about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The strengths are what we are good at, weaknesses where we can improve, our opportunities in terms of what possibilities exist out there for us, and threats, what out there can impact us negatively or stand in our way. Your strengths and your opportunities are usually, what we call the helpful elements, while your weaknesses and threats are the harmful elements. And your strengths and weaknesses are your internal, what makes you up, and your opportunities and threats are your externalities that you basically got out of the analysis before that. If you look at it in a different way, your strengths and weaknesses kind of define what you are capable of doing, and opportunities and threats give us some idea of what is needed and feasible in the area of our work. And we've got to find a marriage between all of this to be able to function optimally. Okay. Unfortunately, what happens is that a lot of organizations would have a SWOT analysis, and I've seen these, and it's a very well-written document. But what happens is, what do you do with this information? And what we do with this information is the following. We basically blow that table apart now. Now we've got input on our opportunities and our threats, which are always a better idea to start out by looking at those things before coming to our strengths and weaknesses. And if you look on the right of the screen now, there's oh, okay, my cursor worked. We ask a simple question: to accomplish our purpose, how might we use our strengths to take advantage of opportunities? How might we use our strengths to minimize threats? How might we address weaknesses to take advantage of opportunities? And how might we address weaknesses to avoid threats? And we ask that question in that particular way because this is the most important brainstorm that an organization can have. And it is of paramount importance that this brainstorm takes place because the answers to these questions, and we will generate lots of answers to these questions in a session or workshop where we are actually dealing with this. The answer to these questions generate the ideas for the big moves that we must make. And those big moves are what we call strategic priorities. Okay? So moving on. We have another poll. Would you like to vote? Has your organization conducted a SWOT analysis recently? 3 options. Yes, no, and I don't know. So please vote. I'd be very interested to see the results of these 2 polls, and we are actually going to be sharing those results with you during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Jazakallah. Let's carry on from there. Now, let's start charting the way forward to accomplish the purpose. Okay. So we've defined the organization in terms of purpose, values, mission, and vision. We've conducted a thorough assessment of the situation externally and the organization itself. And we have extracted from the SWOT analysis options that can form the big moves that we need to make to actually accomplish the purpose. Okay. These are called strategic priorities. They're sometimes called goals, but let's call them strategic priorities for now. Okay. So these are the really big things that need to happen, and some of them might include, funding. Certainly, in this time, with what COVID has done to our world, one very important strategic priority for all organizations, who are busy with strategic planning at this stage, is how do we adapt our organization to remain viable or to remain impactful in a post-pandemic world. And that is key because we can't operate the way we did. It's not just a question of wearing a mask and carrying around hand sanitizers. There's a whole lot more things. A lot of non-profits that engaged in transactions or operations that that required physical touch, have had to rethink this, and excuse me, and it is important that we take account of this. All right. So the first thing we do is now we have options for strategic priorities. And we might come up with a various number of options. And what would happen is we would look and evaluate each of those to basically see what are the really critical things that have to happen if we are to achieve our purpose. I can imagine without your north star of purpose, what do you do with your SWOT analysis? What do we do with this information that we've got? Purpose. It's all about purpose. So we now got the big moves, and then we move into the next stage, which is defining strategic objectives. And these strategic objectives are the concrete steps for action that must be taken to make the big moves. So if one of the big moves is, for example, revenue, that might have what we call a strategic result, to say that we want to focus, one of our strategic priorities will be revenue, and we want to grow our revenue, to achieve sustainability. The strategic objective there would basically break that down into steps of what we actually need to do to grow that revenue. Okay, and those will be, you've all heard of SMART objectives, etc. They would be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. So those are your strategic objectives. Okay, so one strategic objective may be relating to revenue, might be to grow revenue, and that takes us to the next point, which is about setting targets and measures. Setting targets and measures is basically used to tell us how we are progressing on our strategic objectives. Okay, and there's two aspects to targets and measures. The target is what we will measure, and the measure is the value. Okay, now that might sound confusing at first, but some people struggle with it. I know certainly I've experienced that, with some organizations, confusing that. But it's actually very simple, in the sense that if, for example, let's take the revenue example. We said grow revenue, and our target is to increase revenue, say by 20% over last year, or 10% or X% over last year. So what we will be measuring is the level of revenue. That will be our target, and our measure will actually be that 10% or that X%. All right. Once you've got targets and measures in place, so we've got our big moves. These are the big moves that we're going to make, and you might have 3 or 4 strategic objectives. I would certainly not look at having too many strategic priorities. Sorry, those are broken down into strategic objectives, and then we have set targets and measures for strategic objectives. Then we go about selecting the actual projects and activities that will be undertaken to achieve each of the strategic objectives. All right. And your guiding light there is that those initiatives must be matched to the strategic objective. So if we are going to talk about moving from physical collections to virtual collections, that talks to the strategic objective about growing revenue, which talks to the strategic priority about revenue. All right. And by way of a graphical illustration, that's what it would look like. So we are guided by our purpose. These are the 3 to 4 big moves that we need to make to achieve our purpose. Each one of them would have be broken down into objectives. Each objective would have a set of measures and targets, and each objective may have 1 or more projects or initiatives. But more about this in a bit. All right. So at this stage, I want to introduce this framework called a balanced scorecard that I alluded to earlier. And it's a strategic performance management tool that was developed by Drs. Kaplan and Norton. And they look at the organization in terms of 4 perspectives. They try to look at the organization holistically, and not only for profit organizations. It was originally designed for profit organizations, and we're going to adapt it for our use this afternoon. Profit organizations would normally basically just look at the bottom line in terms of how much money is being made. And yet there's a whole lot of activities that happen before that before that result is achieved. So looking at a balanced scorecard looks at the organization more holistically, and it looks at the organization in terms of 4 perspectives. We get a financial perspective, which is to do with the money, the customer perspective, which is to do with the with customers that the business would interact with. I'm explaining the for-profit. I'll get onto the non-profit just now. The internal processes, everything we do internally to basically serve those customers, and the talent and technology, which is the people and technology that drive those processes. And what it helps to do is to translate our strategic objectives into a coherent set of performance measures. So when we adapt this for the for nonprofits, this is what we look at these perspectives somewhat differently. The perspective that they called, sorry, let me just go back there for a bit. The financial perspective is now a resources perspective, and it's at the bottom as opposed to being at the top. And the customer perspective, I've renamed it as the beneficiary perspective, excuse me. And it has moved all the way to the top. And if you go up and down this, okay, we start off at the bottom. And if you look at the text to the left of the screen, it says we raise and use resources in order to invest in our people and organizational capabilities, in order to build competencies and internal processes in order to deliver outcomes for our beneficiaries. Okay, so this is the interrelatedness of it. That if you look at the going down the other way, it flows down that way as well. So if we start with resources, to achieve our purpose, how must we serve our beneficiaries? Sorry, starting from the top. To achieve our purpose, how must we serve our beneficiaries? If you get tired of hearing me saying purpose, there's more coming. What internal organizational processes must we excel at to deliver for our beneficiaries? What skills and capabilities must we have in our organization to drive those internal processes? And to achieve these goals, what resources must be mobilized? Okay. All right. And applying this to what we've got before, we end up with what is called a strategy map. And this is for a hypothetical organization that I set up just to illustrate the concept to you. The strategy map has at the very top the purpose, and this hypothetical organization purpose was that they exist to reduce hunger in impoverished communities in South Africa. Their values, they said our behavior is guided by the Islamic values of compassion, excellence, and respect. In terms of what they do, they provide meals to school children, they run soup kitchens for the homeless and needy, and empower communities to grow food. And their vision, where they want to have impact, what they want to see, if they succeed in achieving their purpose, is a South Africa that is free of hunger. All right. When they went through their process, they came with the pestle and the SWOT analysis. They hypothetically came up with these three strategic priorities. Donation revenue, that they need to grow donation revenue, achieve financial sustainability. Service to recipients, provide more help to more people, because the pandemic has increased the number of people requiring help and has also increased the type of help that people require. Organizational development, adapt the organization to provide greatest impact in the post-pandemic world. Okay, so these are the three broad brushstrokes that actually talk to their purpose. And what they would then do is develop strategic objectives in terms of resources, the talent and technology, which is the people, the internal processes, and basically then be able to deliver to beneficiaries. Okay. What's nice about this document is on one page it basically shows you everything that you need to know, and it helps you in managing performance, because as our moderator said, having the plan is only one part of it, and we'll get onto that just now. But anybody who looks at this plan from within your organization will be able to tell how they contribute to the purpose, how they contribute to individual objectives, strategic objectives, and where they actually fit in. All right. Moving on. Okay. But sometimes things can go wrong, and we need to prepare for uncertainty. I could talk for a whole day on this, so I'm just going to keep it very, very brief. The achievement of your strategic objectives is critical to the strategy. If anything goes wrong with that, it could be disastrous, not only for your strategy, but it could be disastrous for your plan. What if your funding dried up? You'd have to close shop technically. Okay, so what we do is we kind of start off at the top of the circle in terms of managing risk, strategic risks, and we focus on our strategic objectives. We identify risks and assess how they impact each strategic objective. We then identify which activities can trigger those risks, and we develop measures to address, and we monitor and report this and incorporate it into governance. Okay, this is all of strategic risk management in a very small nutshell, but I think you get the idea. It's important that risk is taken into consideration, and I think you have covered risk in a previous webinar. All right. Okay, sorry. Here we go. Having a strategic plan is only one part of the equation. Putting that plan into action is of vital importance. Otherwise, you've wasted your time. I think the first thing that happens is we need to assign responsibility. You need to have, I've called this person a strategy champion. It could be one person, it could be a committee, depending on the size of your organization. It could be anybody in your organization, but hopefully somebody who of seniority, who can lead and coordinate implementation, monitoring, and evaluation activities. Okay, this won't happen on its own. It needs somebody to drive it. The other important part of implementation is communication. We assume that you have taken people on board by being inclusive in your strategic planning, where you have involved your employees and your staff and management, as part of the plan, at the minimum received input from them, and then basically used input from them so that they understand the plan. You have to communicate. You can't under-communicate about the plan. You've got to find, when a plan is first rolled out, there's an important ritual that takes place where there's what is called roadshow with some large organizations. It's very much easier to do those now because we can just get everybody onto a Zoom call and get that message across in a very effective manner. I love working remotely. It's the new normal, and it makes a lot of sense. Communication of utmost importance. Find ways to communicate your strategy. Find every excuse to talk about your strategy. Whether this is through publications, through constant reminders, whatever. But the strategy needs to be communicated to the organization, so those who are to implement it understand it and then internalize it. Then we need to translate that strategic plan into business goals by giving teams or employees ownership of specific strategic objectives. Okay, and this is where the whole layer of operational planning comes in, where we convert that strategic plan into an operational plan, and everybody gets a fair share of the work, hopefully. It's got to be linked to performance. If it's not linked to performance, it becomes something else. It becomes something different from the work that I do. It becomes something different from what I'm rewarded for. It becomes something different from what my performance is assessed on. And the bottom line is this: if we're talking about purpose, there's got to be this golden thread that runs from your purpose down to every initiative that your organization is doing. I remember back in the day when I used to be the chairperson of the strategy committee of that organization that our moderator told you about. I used the analogy of an umbrella, and I said that our strategy is the umbrella. And that umbrella, you need to stay under that umbrella and move in that direction. If at any point in time you find yourself outside the umbrella, you've got to ask yourself, what am I doing here? And that's important. At any point in time, if you've done everything properly in terms of your strategic planning and implementation, at any point in time, every activity that you are doing, you must be able to link back all the way right up to your purpose. Otherwise, something's wrong. Monitoring, your performance results should be monitored and reported on a monthly basis. This is actually very important. Otherwise, it becomes something else. I got my own work to do. I don't know about the strategy thing. It can be problematic. In terms of review, the strategic plan should be reviewed quarterly for performance. Okay, when we look at how we are performing against those targets and measures that we have put in place, and annually in its entirety. Okay, to question the base assumptions. If you are, let's assume, COVID did not even happen. If you are on a 3-year plan, you can't afford to look at your plan once every 3 years when it's time to plan again. Okay, because that's the other thing. You need to build agility and flexibility into plans. I used to use the analogy when I talking about strategy to my people back then was. Look at strategy like you're undertaking a journey, but you're undertaking a journey for a particular reason. You might be traveling to a particular destination to attend an event. Okay, so you're driving. You've got a car. You've made plans about how you're going to fuel, how often you're going to stop. You're really conscientious. You're going to check your tire pressure, you're going to check your oil, you're going to keep your car fueled. All of these things you got to do because these are the things that have to happen along the way. But 2 things here. The one thing is, halfway along your journey, you find out that this event is cancelled. What do? You'll be surprised at how many organizations carry on driving, despite the fact that that event has been cancelled. And I mean that metaphorically. So the logical thing to do when you hear that this event is cancelled, you basically stop your car and then decide what are we going to do from here? How do we take it from here? It's about replanning. At the minimum, that must happen, on a quarterly basis. When COVID happened to us, everybody had to stop in their tracks and basically look at this, because originally we thought, okay, it'll be gone in a month's time, 2 months' time. Former President Trump said 3 months' time. Anyway, let's not talk about him, be that as it may. And here we are. In a few weeks we're going to be, a full year under lockdown. There's no telling, what happens. The vaccine is not the panacea, because the vaccine is very much like the flu vaccine. You can take the flu vaccine and still get sick. So there's no guarantee. We're going to be living with this. Just the other day in the news, there was talk about another mutation. You got to look at your planning differently now. Okay. And scheduling, all your monitoring and evaluation and review events should be scheduled and should form part of corporate calendar so that it becomes part of how we operate. Okay. This is a very brief overview of the activities that you need to undertake, for implementation. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that brings me to my penultimate slide. I'm not going to go through each point here, but strategic plans sometimes fail. And actually, I read an interesting statistic recently that said they fail 50% of the time. And this comes from an article that was published in Forbes magazine as to the top 10 reasons why strategic plans fail. I'm going to talk to a few of them. Number one, that's an obvious, having a plan simply for the sake of having a plan. And this is what happens when a board does not get involved with strategic planning. They require from management that we need to have a strategic plan and leave it to management to do a strategic plan. So management goes through a checkbox to do a strategic plan and say, well, we did what we were supposed to do. Okay. That talks to point number 5, which is writing the plan and putting it on the shelf. Not doing anything with it. It's a complete waste of time. But there are other critical things here. Like number 2, not understanding the environment, focusing on results. Okay. And that is of critical importance. Those exercises that we went through, the pestle analysis and the SWOT analysis, those are not thumb sucks. That's critical information that you are basing what you're going to be doing for the next 2 to 3 years on. You can't afford to take a chance with that information. In the ideal situation, you want to know that that is for real. But you need to do your best to ensure that the veracity of that information. Okay. Having the wrong people in leadership positions, this is something like an elephant in the room that people don't like to talk about. But this is the reality of the situation. I remember there was a book. I can't remember who it was, but the book spoke about something called the peak principle. I think more than a few of you might have heard of it. And it said that every employee shall rise to his own level of incompetence. It's an interesting perspective. But loyalty, when people stay in positions for too long, they get too used to operating in a particular way and then can't see the wood for the trees, which talks to point number 6, an unwillingness or an inability to change. Okay. And obviously, if you have aimed too high, point number 10, unrealistic goals or lack of focus, aim too high, yes, you're not going to be there. You're not going to get there, which is why your strategic objectives have to be realistic in terms of what you are trying to target. All right, I'm going to leave it at that for now. I see there's a flurry of activity on the chat. Okay, we'll talk about that just now. But that brings me to my last slide. And when I came across this image, I thought this image really encapsulates, what I've been trying to talk about today. That if we look at that foremost figure, I think it's a paper plane. It doesn't really matter what it is. But if you get your purpose right, and if you have everything else in place, this is what good strategy looks like. An organization that is pursuing its purpose and that can survive. Jazakallah khairan for listening to me, and I'll yield my time to the moderator now.
Shukran, Afzal, for that very, very in-depth presentation. And I think that if time allowed, you would have gone on to speak for a couple of hours more on the topic, which basically shows us how much of expertise you have on this particular area. Okay, look, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to some questions to sort of initiate our discussion. And I have to say that there's been a flood of questions that have been flooding in as we go along, but something that I think we need to also clarify, because I heard a lot of new terms today. So maybe you can start off by giving us the distinction between targets and measures. I know you spoke about it in your presentation, but I think for me and for everybody who's here, let's get some clarity on what is the distinction between these two terms.
Sorry, Munira, you just broke up there for a minute. Can you confirm that you said the difference between target and measures?
Yes. I said if you could give us clarity on those two concepts, yes.
Okay. So invariably, this is to do with how we measure progress in terms of what we're trying to do, okay? So the if, for example, we have a campaign, okay, and we want to measure the effectiveness of this campaign. So we would basically say, all right, fine, here's a particular measure. What we will measure is the number of people that attend our event, okay, and so that is the target. We will be measuring the number of people. Okay, and the measure is an actual physical number, So we might then set that. Excuse me, I just need to drink some water, please. Let's just go back there. So the target is what we will measure. So we're going to measure the number of people, and that's what we would write in there, the number of people, okay? And the measure would be how many people. So we're going to basically say that we are targeting 200 people per event. And if we get 200 people to an event, then we know that we have achieved that, okay? Does that clarify that?
Yes, I think it does, and why I said clarity is because I think it's important when you're engaging in the strategic planning to be very careful about what you set down as your targets and therefore how you actually go about measuring them. If we get them confused, then our whole plan sort of is in jeopardy for that matter. Now, we have as I said, we have quite a list of questions. Some of which are not all very, very relevant to our session this afternoon. So, for example, please explain the main difference of governance Zakat institutions and Awqaf institutions. I would suggest for the person who raised that question to please raise it with Awqaf. And there have been other seminars that have dealt with some of these questions, but that particular question is obviously not something that we can deal with in today's session. And the same goes for the question that basically asks, how about the governance for the Baitul Mal and its charity features, etc. So that basically is something that you're going to have to contact Awqaf and try and get your answers for that. And also it basically means that try and attend all of the seminars, because if you have missed the past ones, some of those have dealt with these issues, and the recordings of that are available, so you can access those. Okay, so maybe Afzul, you can then tell us what is the sort of time limit for a strategic plan. The question here is, can you have a strategic plan for 1 year? So I think that ties in with another question about how do you actually select the initiatives for strategic planning? So if you are able to select them, then you figure out, yeah. So maybe you can tell us about that.
All right. I think I alluded to that during the presentation in terms of saying that typically your time horizon for strategic planning is 2 to 5 years. A lot of public sector organizations, plan for 5 years, and the private sector organizations, would plan for shorter time periods. The problem with having a strategic plan for 1 year is that there's number one, there's too much effort that goes into strategic planning to start off with, and number two, depending on the type of business you are, and I'm just trying to rack my brains to figure out some kind of business that will be able to achieve what it sets out to achieve, in 1 year from a strategic perspective. So there's not enough time to roll out things. Strategic planning is generally long-range planning. Okay, so that's the first question. So the question was, can you? Yes, you can, but it's not going to help you much. Okay, so I wouldn't. The second part of the question was about how do you select initiatives, okay? And selecting initiatives is not about saying, okay, we've reached this part of our strategic plan, we've got, the big moves, we've got the action steps, and okay, so now we're going to have so many this, we're going to have so many that, we're going to have so many that, and we can come up with a list of things that we can actually do. But what you need is, you need to match your initiatives to each strategic objective so that what you are doing is nested under a strategic objective. And if it is nested under a strategic objective, it is by default nested under a strategic priority. And if it is nested under a strategic priority, then it relates to your purpose. If you have an initiative that you can't find a home for because it doesn't fit anywhere, then we've got to be asking ourselves, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? So that's the answer. You select to link it back to purpose, and that golden thread must flow from purpose all the way down to your initiative. All right.
Thanks for that. You have to know you're in the hot seat this afternoon, so you're going to get the third degree, and so the questions are coming through, as I said quite previously. So the next question is, how does one instill the Islamic vision of excellence in an organization during your strategic planning process?
Okay. This is to do with an area called organizational culture. Okay, but even before we get there, the person probably was motivated by the input on values. Okay, when you basically list the values, all right, and excellence is listed as one of the values, that your values, remember what I said, your values guide your conduct in how you behave. Okay, and we're not talking about in your personal life, we're talking about how we behave as an organization, in all our interactions, how we behave as an organization. And a lot of times there is this disjuncture between values and what actually going down in an organization, simply because the people at the top do not live those values. Okay, so this is of paramount importance. The living the values, being aware of the values, and what helps. I know in my example, I just said the value of compassion, for example, but a good value statement would basically take that one step further and actually explain what that means in how we operate. To instill excellence, it's got to start out at the top to live that value. We cannot expect excellence from our subordinates if our leadership does not display excellence and does not pursue excellence. Okay. And it's actually helpful as part of the communication, to actually have to workshop each of these things and get ideas from within the organization as how do we bring these things to life. Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you for that. Now there's another question here. How may we solve mistakes in strategic planning? And I'm thinking after your presentation that if I had to sort of phrase this particular question, then we would rather look at what happens, or how do we sort of recuperate after a particular strategic planning initiative has failed. How do we get back on track?
Okay. All right. Just before I answer that question, I see we have the results of our poll on the SWOT analysis, which is actually interesting. There's very few organizations that have recently conducted one, and
yes.
And the majority of the people have either not conducted or don't know. And this is actually it's actually tragic to see this kind of result, because let's, for the purpose of the exercise, assume of that 40% who has not conducted. Well, in fairness, the question was recently, so let's assume that they did conduct it, but not recently. But when we designed that poll question, it was very, very important. That poll question was very, very important, because recently something big happened. Coronavirus happened recently, and if you haven't stopped to take stock of what's going on, then that's problematic. That's problematic. So anyway, let's move on from there. So the question was about if you make strategic mistakes in your strategic planning.
What happens when it fails?
Yeah, when it fails. So strategic planning, it will fail, and you'll find out when it failed. But by the time you find out, a lot of time has elapsed, because when you implement a strategic plan and you've made a mistake in something, it doesn't show up in the first week. It might not even show up in the first year, but it will show up in time. And it's like in anything. If you make a mistake, you got to go back and fix it. Okay, you need to basically institute change management. You might have made an assumption that was wrong. In terms of your operating environment, there's a whole move towards customer centricity. Okay, sorry. And customer centricity is all about empathizing with the customer, and in terms of the kind of service that you're going to provide, in the terms of any product that you might design, for this particular user, as an example. And if we sit and come up with an idea and we say, oh, this is going to be a great idea and people will love it, we find out in the court of public opinion that that the idea rises to the air with all the grace of a lead balloon, and you can't just persist because because this was our plan and this is what we're going to carry on doing. You can't. It's as bad as continuing on your journey when you've received news that the event you're traveling towards has been cancelled. So you got to stop. You got to replan. Go into change management, build credibility with your stakeholders, with your staff, and be honest about it. Organizations have made mistakes in the past, and dealt with them decently, I would think.
Okay, you've alluded to in your comments just now to the fact that we have to take cognizance of how the pandemic is impacting organizations, etc. And of course, I'm referring to the corona pandemic here. There's a question here that's sort of linked to that comment that you made. Strategic management in disruptive times and the pandemic has resulted in a rethink of strategy principles. What are these significant shifts that need to be considered? How exactly will the strategy align itself with the new dynamics that are being presented in terms of the pandemic and how we're experiencing it?
I think, if anything, the pandemic has basically taught us, that there are futures out there that we never conceived of. I mean, who would have thought that the world would be brought to its knees the way it has? Okay. In terms of its impact on strategic planning, it's made strategic planning even more important. We need to, when we do things like the pestle analysis, when we do things like the SWOT analysis, we need to almost look in terms of different realities existing out there that we never thought about before. Okay, we need to have this mindset that what, anything is possible. Anything is possible, because a year ago, if you told me, on a Saturday on the 27th of February, where would you be? And those who know me well would know that I'd be somewhere where there's water, because that's when I go fishing on a Saturday. But I haven't been for quite some time now, because of the way the world has changed. So it has brought the value and the importance of planning to the fore. It has brought the value of information to the fore. It has brought the value of looking at things very differently, and of conceiving of ideating new things. There's a whole lot of new things that are going to be happening to us going forward as part of this. And so those are the shifts it has. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not going to change the fact that we have to plan, but it's going to have, it changes the way that plan gets nuanced. It changes the way that that we have to be more agile. It's like, if we're talking about the car, making that trip in the car, you're not going to slow down. You're going to apply your brakes and make a 180 turn, and look at things completely differently. So those are some of the things. But a lot of what's happening out there right now is organizations responding. Okay. I remember early in the day, and a very good friend of mine who's in the audience will remember this. He said, what the pandemic did was almost like, when the when we all were in a ship, and maybe the ship ran aground, whatever the case might be, but everybody was in the water, and we are trying to desperately get to land. And that's all what's happening. A lot of organizations are still in survival mode, and their planning has become like really short term. How are we going to get through the next 3 to 6 months? That's not strategic planning. This is crisis planning to basically get us back to a point of strength where we can find our place in the sun and get to start and write a new chapter for ourselves.
Afzul, something that's coming up quite often is the question of funding for NPOs, and of course, then what's the next question is, how does the funding issue impact on your strategic planning? I mean, I'm sure it has a huge impact, but exactly how does it make this impact?
Yep. So remember, a strategic plan has got to be funded. There's a budget that goes with the strategic plan. And in my first slide, I said one of the things is that why strategic planning is important, because it guides the allocation and utilization of resources. Everything within a nonprofit starts with funding. Okay. And your strategic plan has got to take cognizance of that at 2 levels. Number one, to basically find the best ways to generate those funds or to attract those funds. And then number 2, how those funds are going to be dispensed. Because let me put it to you this way. Every time I give to charity, a question in my mind is, how much of my money is getting to the cause? Okay. And what happens is, to me, that's a key metric for for nonprofits, as to how many dollars or rands or euros or pounds, whichever jurisdiction you're watching from, how much of that gets to cause. Okay, and it's of vital importance, that because that's how you that will impact directly on your ability to attract more funds. I mean, would you be happy to donate to a charity 100 units of currency when you know that 95 units of that currency do not go to cause? You might want to just go and find the beneficiary of that charity and give them the whole 100 yourself. You know what I'm saying? Okay.
True. True. Well, let's move on to the next question then. Very interesting. I think I want to also hear the answer to this. Is there a difference when you're planning or you're engaging in strategic planning for non-profit organizations or for normal profit organizations? Is there a difference in the way you approach your strategic planning for these two different entities?
Yeah. Not really. You would follow the same. You would follow the same path that we followed today. In terms of doing all of this. I mean, in terms of defining your purpose, your values, your mission, and your vision, conducting an assessment. Looking at your strategic priorities. You'd follow the same framework. When you get to the point of the balanced scorecard, okay, as opposed to being a consumer of resources, it works the other way. You become a generator of resources. So, like I said, when I spoke about the balanced scorecard, that the financial perspective of the balanced scorecard will be at the top of an organization's balanced scorecard if they are a profit organization. And it's at the bottom if they're a non-profit organization because of the difference in focus. But you would use the same process. You use the same process.
Okay. And when you are engaging in strategic planning, right, what is the risk then of setting timelines that are either too short or too long? Is there sort of a sort of average kind of timeline you should set, or what's the risk if it's too long or if it's too short?
What for to actually do the strategic planning? This is.
Well, the question says, what is the risk of setting the timelines or the time horizons either too short or too long? So I'm thinking perhaps what you talk about is the activities in the plan. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not about formulating the plan; it's about the plan itself.
Yes.
It's about planning, for a shorter or a longer time horizon. I think what happens is, I think we've answered this question because in an earlier question we said if you can't plan for too short a time horizon because it's impractical because you'd not be able to to achieve any of your objectives. Okay, in all likelihood. On the other hand, if you plan for too long a time horizon, you would have achieved objectives, and then what happens? Then once an objective is achieved, it's achieved, and it needs to be replaced by something else. So you can't have a 10-year plan. The only thing that is timeless in what we spoke about today is your purpose. Your purpose is timeless. Everything else has, for want of a better term, a sell-by date, okay, or is time-bound. Let me not be frivolous about this. Is time-bound, okay? But you remember that point I made earlier was to say that when you look at your strategic objectives, if you've got a 3-year strategic plan and you've got a strategic objective that's going to go 10 years, you've got to break that down to basically, to do what you can in that first period. You do not have a strategic plan that has got 10 strategic objectives. The strategic plan runs for 5 years, and all those strategic objectives will be achieved in the first year. What do you do after that? That's the issue. So the period of time that you expect your strategic objectives to be achieved, is a very strong informer of your time horizon.
Okay, So you must always have practicalities, at the back of your mind when you're engaging in this, and what is doable, and within which timeline this is actually doable. I think you've touched on this, but let's just get it again from you. How often should a strategic plan be reviewed? I mean, should we have a set time that we're going to review it every 3 years, or every 5 years, or every 2 years? Or does it depend on the type of NPO that you are, etc.?
Yeah. Well, as I said in the implementation, the review is of two types. Okay, you have a performance review and then a review where you are looking at the plan in its entirety. So it's a good idea to have a quarterly review at the minimum for performance. Okay, so that you can report quarterly performance in terms to your stakeholders, to your donors. This is information that they need, because that will help them to to make decisions about whether they want to continue to fund you or not, as an example. Okay, then you've got to, at the minimum, if your plan is a multi-year plan, then at the minimum, each year, review that plan and go through the process, of the PESTLE and the SWOT analysis, and, looking at the performance. If we are not performing on all of our strategic objectives, we must be able to give some form of explanation. Okay. If it's due to extraneous, if it's due to extraneous circumstances, we need to, to basically address that. So when I say you do a plan, a review on a yearly basis, this is when you really go down into the guts of that plan. You pull out that old PESTLE and SWOT analysis, and you conduct a new one to basically test your base assumptions. Is everything still in place? Are we still on track? Otherwise, you are just going to carry on driving to this destination where the event has been cancelled.
Okay, shukran for that. I just got the last two questions now for you. We have reached almost the end of the seminar. I think you're going to be a big sigh of relief soon. But who in the organization should be accountable for the strategic plan? Should it be the one who is most experienced in the organization? Should it be a committee? Should it be an individual? Who exactly should be responsible for the strategic plan?
Okay, let's start off with the ownership of the plan. Okay, the ownership of the plan vests with the board. Okay, the management and staff of the organization implement that plan. Okay, they're involved in the planning process, like I said there. Okay, so the first line of reporting, okay, or hierarchy, is that the board mandates the executive director or the chief executive officer or the main manager of the non-profit. So after the board, ownership vests in him, and he's actually responsible. Okay, but that person can delegate that responsibility to another person. Okay, to another senior manager. When I was in the CCMA, I was a senior manager that reported to the director, and I acted as the chairperson of the strategy committee. That basically, it was a committee that took responsibility for the strategy. Again, depending on the size of the organization, committees can be problematic. And sometimes it takes longer to get what's done, through a committee, for example. And so a single person can be, the responsible person who actually looks after everything and drives the processes and becomes like the strategy champion, for want of a better term, in the organization. And if it's a larger organization, then maybe you might want to delegate that to a committee.
Okay, so what I understand is that obviously it's going to be determined according to the nature and the size of each organization that you're dealing with, and what their nature of business is, basically. And so for the last question then, Afzal, and I think it's a good question for us to round off with, what is the risk of not having a strategic plan in place?
Okay, all right. Interestingly enough, the risk of having a strategic plan in place is the organization is then basically rudderless. It is just doing whatever it does. It is trying to operate in a vacuum. It operates maybe just by reacting to what's happening in its external environment. Remember earlier I said that one of the values of strategic planning is that it enables, through the process, it enables an organization to be proactive, to act from a position of proactivity as opposed to reactivity. So without a plan, you're going to basically be rolling along, responding to changes in the market, in the environment, in demand as they happen. And I don't think that's a very good idea. You need a track to run on. You need a track to run on. You need to plot a course for yourself. You need to be able to, at the minimum, know where you're going. In terms of why you exist. The thing is, I think what happens is that sometimes we tend to have a very complicated view about strategic planning. And it shouldn't be that way, because think about it. You strategic plan as a family without realizing it. You go through various processes, maybe not formal, but in terms of how your life has rolled out up to now, like what I mean. It's part of of things that have happened along the way, and a strategic plan does not have to be a 50-page document. In fact, I don't like strategic plans that are 50-page documents, because nobody reads them, and nobody can say with any sense of sincerity that they understand it, that they internalize it. If you recall the strategy map, okay, that explains the strategy so clearly, okay, and that strategy map can be drawn up by a huge organization. It can be drawn up by a group of friends who a couple of years ago decided to start a soup kitchen around the corner from where they live. Okay, that would have helped them to grow to another part, to another level today. It can be done by a group of people who are not even a registered charity or a registered organization, who just out of the goodness of their hearts want to get together and help a community do something that they want to do. They got to have a plan, and they can also use this very same approach. So we're not talking about an approach that is rise per size, or they can use this. They can go through every step, and the largest organization who's with us today, who shall remain nameless, can also do that. And and inshallah, both of them will succeed in what they are trying to achieve.
Thank you. And I think the note on which we can bring this to a close is basically that once you've engaged in a strategic planning session, that skill that you learn is not something, as you've said, that is limited only to the organization. I mean, look how you've explained how it can be extended to your personal life, and you're correct. I mean, we all had to do some kind of strategic planning from the 26th of March last year. We have to relook at how we approached various different things in our life, and that in itself was an example of how we implement strategic planning in our personal lives or at home. So on that note then, I'm going to bring this to an end. And of course, we can't end this wonderful seminar without paying homage and gratitude to the various different organizations and individuals that made this possible this afternoon. So a big shukran to all our partners in this webinar. This webinar is a joint initiative. So it was jointly hosted by Awqaf South Africa, which is basically the National Awqaf South African Foundation. And then it is AMAL. I am a member of AMAL. So I'm representing AMAL here this afternoon, which is the Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers. And then we have Sanzaf, which is the South African National Zakat Fund, and UUCSA, which is the United Ulama Council of South Africa. So thank you to all our partners who assisted in making this possible. Of course, a very, 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 very big thank you to Afzul Soobedaar, who's our speaker, for sharing his immense knowledge on this topic and giving us insights into the various different ways in which this strategic planning can actually be implemented, crafted, etc. Shukran Suleiman Badat, you are the, what's the word I'm looking for? You are the creator of all of these series of webinars, without which we would not even have been all coming together this afternoon to actually participate in this. So thank you for your involvement in the series of webinars right from the inception and in coordinating and helping us to move along in this particular direction. Shukran, Zainul Kaji, you made yourself available to our media, the radio, and you took part in an interview that basically raised awareness around this program this afternoon. A huge shukran to Qari Tanzilur Rahman for that beautiful melodious recitation that was rendered right at the opening of the program today. To all our participants who registered, to all of you who listened in through YouTube or through Facebook, shukran for joining and attending. And of course, all this wonderful technology would not have been in place without Hasnain Abdullah. So I cannot complete this list without saying a huge thank you to Hasnain for the technical coordination. And he had with him two assistants as well that come from the iSkills team, Amna and Muazza, who basically also assisted in the poll questions, etc. Thank you to the both of you for participating. Shukran. Thank you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.